For this lesson, we're going to be making a histogram from a data set. So the steps that we're going to follow, I've listed to make it easier to understand. Make a frequency table for the data with intervals. Graph, you're going to make a histogram, and it's going to have an X and Y axis, and we're going to label them. And last but not least, we're going to draw our rectangles that represent our data, and they should be the same width corresponding to our frequency table. So let's look at the problem. So below is a list of birth years of all the teachers at Parkway Elementary School. We're going to fill in the frequency table using the data and then create a histogram of the data. So notice it runs from 1982, 1991, 1994, 1989, 74, 90. These numbers are definitely not in numerical order. But as I was looking over them, I saw that I have, going to the smallest decade, I have in the 50s. And then I see that I have 60s, I have 70s, I have 80s, and I even have some 90s for the years. So notice my frequency table that I set up. I have my ranges for my years. So these are my intervals. Everybody, I'm going to mark a tally mark for anyone that was born in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And we're just going to go ahead and put a little dot or mark our data so that we can see that we made sure we get everything. So we're going to start off with 50. So as I'm looking here, I see that, yes, I have one there. So for my frequency table, I am going to go ahead and just put one tally mark. And the number actually is a 1. Oh, sorry, my transparency is moving. Okay, so now for the 60s, I'm looking for all my 60s. Here is 1. And I don't believe that, did I miss one? I thought there were 2 of them. I'm looking, double checking again without me reading them out loud to you. Oh, it was right next door to it. There you go. So I see that I have 2 in my 60s. So I'm going to put for my frequency table, again, when you make a frequency table, you are going to go ahead and you are going to put tally marks. So we have 2, and then we are going to write the number 2. Because this number is going to help us when we actually are graphing over here. We're not going to want to look at our tally marks. Okay, so now let's go back to the graph. I think I'll pick up a different color. And I'm going to my 70s, and I see I have 1, 2, 3. Going back over it again. Making sure I didn't miss one in my 70s, and see, that's why you double check. I do have 4 of them. So it is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm putting my 4 here. All right, let's now look at our 80s. And again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to double underline, I think, the 80s. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5. Wow, a lot in the 80s. So, and I'm going to double check just to make sure I did not miss one. Yes, those are all there. 80s, 80s. See, that's why you double check. So I see that, yes, I do have 6 in the 80s. So as I'm working this problem, I'm going to write my tally marks is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I could go ahead and when I find one, put a tally mark, but I like to go ahead and just go double check to make sure that I have everything before I put it in my chart. And now for the 90s, what's left that has not been marked? And I'm going to go ahead and circle that. I have 91, 94, a 90, going, a 93, and a 90. So everything, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, should be marked in my graph at this point because I'm at the end of my decades. And that was a 5. And when we mark our tally marks, there it is. And I'm writing my 5. Again, you can do it as you're finding them, or you can do it like I just did. The column that is going to be most important when we're graphing is your number column. So it says to graph the X and Y axis, which I've already done for you. And we have a title. It's what year were you born? Remember, these were teachers. And then the frequency tells us how many teachers. Notice it's in intervals of 2. So if I have a 5, it's going to have to be halfway between 4 and 6. And then down below, I put down the decades, which were from my 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And as we do this, we really need to try to go ahead and have our rectangles the same width because this is our interval. And when you're drawing, and they should touch, but when you're drawing it, you need to go ahead and just do the best you can. Don't, worry. Remember, you're not a machine. And believe you me, mine are not going to be perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to, let's do this in blue. I'm going to my 50s, which is right here, and I see I have a 1. So I'm going to go ahead, and when I have a 1, remember, it's kind of like right here, I'm going to draw my rectangle right there, representing my 1. I think I'll even bring that over a little bit more. Okay. There it is. So now for the 60s, we actually have 2. And when you're making a histogram, your rectangles should touch. So here I'm going up to my 60s and I'm going over. And again, I know I'm not a machine. I know I didn't go ahead and make that the exact same width, but the frequency is extremely important that I have it to where how many teachers were in the 60s. All right, let's look at the 70s. We see we have 4. So I know I'm going to go all the way up to this line, and I'm going to just connect it to this other one. Again, attempting straight lines and attempting the same width, which is not an easy task. But remember, we're human, we're not machines, and we're going to try to, when you do it, and if you do it with a pencil, you can totally adjust your drawing. But when you're doing this with a marker, there is no going back. This is it. All right, there is my bar for my 70s. And now looking at my 80s, I see I have 6 of them. So I'm going to go all the way up to the top. And I'm trying to make it the same width, doing the best I can. But it might not be perfect because I'm not a machine. And there are our 80s. Looking at the last one in the 90s, we have 5. So we know that 5 would be right here. So I'm going to go across and I'm going to draw my little line there. And I'm going to bring it down. and I'm filling it in. Okay, so with your histogram, notice once you make it and we don't have this frequency chart to look at, we really just know the number that is in this interval. We do not know what number it is. And for the 50s, I'm going back to my data, it was actually 56, but it's just in the 50s. So a histogram, if you're looking at the data, you'll know where your intervals are, but you will not know the exact year like we have up here from our chart alone. So the question is asking, which decade was the most occurring in this data set? And so what I need to do is I'm just going to go right up here, and I see that the 80s is the highest. So it is 1980s is the most occurring data set. So this is a true or false question. The teachers at this school have an age range of 40 years. Well, remember, we know that it's from the 90s to the 50s, but we don't know exactly what that range is. So we're going to have to look at the data that we have. And I see that my highest year, looking here, this is my highest year. So I'm going to put, and we're looking for the range, 1994. And now I'm going to look for my lowest year. And remember, we just talked about that. That was 1956. So to find the actual range, all we're going to do is subtract. And yes, of course, you know, you have to regroup. And our range is 38. So it is not a true statement. It's false. The teachers at the school have an age range of 40 years. Remember, you go back to the actual data. You just don't do 1990s minus 1950s. If this video was helpful to you today, please add a like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe for more Math with Marcia. See you again soon.